was 15 years old and lived in a village called Measham in Leicestershire, England, with her family. She was part of a big family and was very close to her brothers and sisters. Her mom, Stephanie, said Kaylee was like a second mom to her younger siblings. Kaylee was cheerful and had many friends. Her head teacher said she was determined to succeed in life. Like most teenagers, Kaylee spent a lot of time on her phone and social media, especially Facebook, where she enjoyed sharing photos and updates with friends and family, both from school and online. Friday 13th, 2015. Just after 3 p.m., Kaylee sent a message to her friend Katie saying she wouldn't be able to see her later, as she said she would be staying at her aunt's house. That evening, Kaylee asked her father Martin for a lift to Ipstock, around a 10-minute drive away from her home in Meacham. She told him she was going to meet her friend and would be staying over that weekend. Martin dropped Kaylee off outside Ipstock Community College at around 6 p.m. that evening. All seemed well, and the following morning Kaylee was in contact with her parents asking if she could stay at her friend's house for another night. After that, they heard nothing. For someone that was glued to her mobile phone, this unnerved her parents. They reassured themselves that she was just busy with her friend, and remained as calm as they could. But on Sunday the 15th, what turned out to be Kaylee's smashed and broken iPhone was found on a street by a member of the public. Upon finding the phone, the man called the last number in Kaylee's call history. This number belonged to one of Kaylee's friends. As soon as the phone call ended, Kaylee's friend phoned Stephanie, Kaylee's mother, and told her what had happened. Stephanie was shocked, as the friend that had phoned her was the same friend Kaylee had said she'd been staying with, but this friend hadn't actually heard from her in days. There was nothing on Kaylee's social media, and nobody had spoken to or seen her. Her family knew they had to get the police involved, and she was reported missing later that Sunday. Detective Chief Superintendent David Sandel of Leicestershire Police was leading the investigation, and the case started to move very quickly. Over 400 police officers were working on the searches and interviews. Kaylee's laptop was seized and her smashed but still working phone was taken in for an inspection too. Police began to check through all her messages and social media interactions and posts. They asked about Kaylee's state of mind when she left the family home on Friday, but by all accounts, she seemed to be her usual and happy self. Nothing seemed amiss. Stephanie said she knew something bad had happened to her daughter, and despite Kaylee's father, Martin, and the police doing their best to reassure her, Stephanie's gut was telling her that something was deeply wrong. Tragically, just 2 days later, this missing persons case would escalate. Kaylee told multiple stories about who she was going to visit that weekend, but one of her friends gave some compelling. Kaylee had confided in this friend and told her that she had started talking to someone on Facebook. She said she was going to visit him on Friday the 13th and asked if her friend would go with her. However, shortly after the plan was set in motion, Kaylee canceled and said she was no longer going. Monday 16th, 2 days since anyone had heard from Kaylee. To the public and media's shock, the police announced that 2 people had been arrested on suspicion of kidnap after a property in Ipstock had been searched. Over the next couple of days, searches were carried out across the whole of Ipstock and surrounding areas. Items of clothing confirmed to be Kaylee's were found scattered over a 10-mile radius. Less than 24 hours after the 2 suspects had been arrested on suspicion of kidnap, they were rearrested, this time on suspicion of the murder of Kaylee Haywood. On the 18th of November at around 10 p.m., the police made a tragic discovery. It was confirmed that it was Kaylee Haywood's body. She had been beaten to death. Her jaw and nose were both broken and her body was covered in injuries and self-defense wounds. There were 42 breaks to her body, 16 breaks to her face and 6 lacerations to the back of her head. The post-mortem examination also determined that she had been subjected to a horrifying sexual assault. The suspects still in custody on suspicion of her murder were Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman. But how and why had this come to happen and unravel so quickly? In the months leading up to Kaylee's murder, Luke Harlow had attempted to contact a string of underage girls, the youngest being just 13 years old. In some of the messages, he spoke of wanting to kidnap the girls and keep them as slaves. He said, "Having sex with drunk and conscious girls is my favorite." On the 31st of October 2015, less than a month before Kaylee's body was found, Kaylee had received a friend request on Facebook from Luke Harlow, which she accepted. As soon as she did, she got a message from him. "Hey, how are you?" Kaylee replied, "Fine. Who are you?" Within about 10 minutes, they had exchanged phone numbers and went on to send over 2,600 messages back and forth over the course of 2 weeks. Kaylee and Luke both initially lied about their ages. Kaylee made herself 19 and Luke told her he was a year younger. However, Kaylee quickly admitted that she was only 15 years old. But this didn't deter Luke Harlow, and he continued to shower her with attention and compliments over the next 2 weeks. He said they needed to keep their relationship a secret, and the messages got more graphic and explicit as the days went on. Luke asked Kaylee if she would meet him at his house and they could watch movies and have food together. Luke quickly added more to this plan, and he asked Kaylee if she wanted to get drunk with him, as he would be buying vodka for both of them. They made a plan to meet on Friday the 13th of November, 2 weeks since they had started talking. Luke told Kaylee to lie to her family and friends about where she was going and who she was meeting, so that their relationship could remain a secret. It is unknown exactly what happened on that Friday night, but Kaylee's friends said she had woken to a message sent from Kaylee's iPhone just after 9 p.m. on Friday night. The message simply said, "Help." Her friend texted her back and asked her what she'd meant. She said she got a message straight back saying, "I meant hello." Her friend described the messages as unusual and said they didn't sound like her. Sometime on Sunday morning, Kaylee asked her parents if she could stay over at her friend's house for one more night, and they agreed, believing she was safe and with someone they knew. At some point during the Saturday evening, Luke ran out of alcohol and went to his neighbors to get some more. Stephen Beedman, a landscape gardener, lived just a stone's throw away from Luke, but he had no alcohol either. Both men went to the shops for more drinks, and then both returned to Luke's house. There was no mention of Stephen's name in any of the chat logs or messages between Luke and Kaylee, so it is fairly certain she had no knowledge that Stephen even existed. The events that transpired in the following hours are nothing short of horrific. In the late evening of Saturday night, neighbors heard banging and crashing sounds coming from inside the house. Kaylee, having been plied with alcohol, was sexually assaulted by Harlow. She fled the house without her shoes, naked from the waist down, being chased down by Beedman. A witness whose house overlooked the pathway near Harlow's home looked outside his window that night and saw what he initially thought was a police officer attempting to restrain a young girl by pinning her to the ground. He then assumed it was a young couple having some sort of domestic argument, as he saw the pair get up and walk away holding hands. He said he didn't see or hear anything from them again. Stephen Beedman marched Kaylee to a car park where he subjected her to a horrifying sexual assault. He then proceeded to walk with Kaylee to a park area. Kaylee managed to break away and start running, but Beedman caught up with her and Kaylee hit Beedman in the face with a brick. Beedman then picked up some brick and beat her to death with it. The wounds on Beedman's face showed just how hard Kaylee had fought until the end. As soon as she was reported missing just a day later, police quickly discovered the messages between Luke and Kaylee. Luke Harlow's property was then searched. Police saw that the house was in chaos and some of Kaylee's belongings were still there. Luke Harlow was immediately brought in for questioning and placed under arrest for kidnap. He admitted that Kaylee had been at his house and said that he knew it was wrong because of her age, but he said he had woken up the next morning to find her missing and assumed that she had gone home during the night. He told police that he and his neighbor Stephen Beedman had gone to go and buy more alcohol and returned to the house together. Harlow then claimed that he went to bed drunk, leaving Kaylee and Beedman alone. With this, the hunt was on to find Stephen Beedman. He was found at a family member's house and was swiftly brought in for questioning and arrested on suspicion of kidnap. Police were immediately taken aback by the scratches covering Beedman. His face was a picture that instantly spoke 1,000 words. Beedman also denied knowing where Kaylee was and said he had left Luke Harlow and her together on the sofa in Harlow's house. Both men said they had been drinking excessively and a lot of the night was either hazy or a total blackout. However, between the messages, the witness statements and the marks on Beedman's face, it was clear for all to see that both Harlow and Beedman were the people responsible for what had happened to Kaylee Haywood. Police also later found images of child abuse on Beedman's computers. A series of interviews later, Stephen Beedman admitted that he and Kaylee had left the house together that night. He asked investigators if he could talk with his appropriate adult. He then finally told the police where Kaylee was. When officers finally found Kaylee's body, it was so damaged that the police could not allow Stephanie and Martin to see their daughter in that state. Instead, they arranged for the pair to hold Kaylee's hand, but nothing more. Kaylee's body was identified using dental records. On the 20th of November 2015, shortly after being arrested, Leicestershire police announced that Stephen Beedman had been charged with rape and murder, and Luke Harlow had been charged with grooming and 2 counts of sexual activity with a child. In January of 2016, Kaylee's funeral was held. Bows were tied around trees in Kaylee's favorite color, purple. Hundreds of mourners packed out the streets of Measham as her coffin was carried on a white horse-drawn carriage. Outpourings of grief, sadness, and anger for what had happened was apparent in the whole community. Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman eventually pled guilty to the crimes, but the prosecution weren't satisfied with these pleas and put another charge of false imprisonment forward for both men. Both of them pled not guilty to this charge, and so, with the blessing of Kaylee's family, prosecutor Miranda Moore QC took it to trial. In June 2016, the trial of Stephen Beedman and Luke Harlow began in Nottingham Crown Court, with Judge Mrs. Justice Cox presiding. Prosecutor Miranda Moore argued that the way in which Luke Harlow's house was found by the police showed obvious signs of a struggle, and that Kaylee had been held there against her will. Things were smashed and broken, items were knocked over, and the house was in disarray. She also said that Luke Harlow's claims of being asleep and having no idea what had happened to Kaylee didn't add up either. Luke's glasses had been smashed, presumably due to Kaylee fighting him off. The state that the house was in was further backed up by neighbors, who said they had heard banging and crashing sounds, and this likely would have woken Harlow if he was asleep. Stephen Beedman simply said that Kaylee was free to leave the house at any time she wanted. After a painful 2-week trial for the family and friends of Kaylee Hayward, the jury had reached their verdict. Both Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman were found guilty of false imprisonment alongside their previous guilty pleas. Luke Harlow was sentenced to 12 years for meeting a child following sexual grooming, 2 counts of sexual activity with a child, attempting to meet 2 other 15-year-old girls following sexual grooming, and false imprisonment. Stephen Beedman was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years for the false imprisonment, rape, and murder of Kaylee Hayward. Justice Cox said of the case, "Is truly horrifying to contemplate. I am entirely satisfied on the evidence that she would have been acutely distressed and frightened. It seems to me this is every parent's worst nightmare. It is absolutely clear to me, absolutely no blame can be attached to them for what happened." In April 2021, it was announced that Stephen Beedman had died in prison. In a statement, a spokesperson said, "The prison service cannot confirm the cause of death, which is rightly a matter for the coroner." Following the tragic events that unfolded on November 13th, Kaylee's family set up Kaylee's Cause, which would campaign to increase the minimum age for use of social media websites to 16. The family wants site operators to request some sort of legal document, like a passport or driver's license, to prove a child's age, even if they have permission of their parents to open the account. Alongside this, a short film entitled Kaylee's Love Story was created by Leicestershire Police and Affectus Films. It aims to highlight the dangers of speaking to strangers online and raises awareness for the Cease campaign, commitment to eradicate abuse and sexual exploitation. With the permission of Kaylee's family, the film reenacted some of the events that transpired during the last 14 days of Kaylee's life. It went on to receive numerous awards and has proven to be Leicestershire Police's most successful campaign. It has now been seen by thousands of school children across the country and millions more across the world online, making sure that people become aware of Kaylee's story. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Dominique Ellen Dunn was born on November 23, 1959, in Santa Monica, California. She was the youngest child of Ellen, often called Lenny, who inherited a ranch, and Dominique, a writer, actor, and producer. Her parents divorced a few years after Dominique's birth but stayed close friends, and Dominique remained close to both of them. With her family's connections to the entertainment industry, It wasn't surprising that Dominique developed an interest in performing herself. After graduating and taking time to travel, she began studying acting and booked roles in well-known stage shows, including West Side Story, The Mousetrap, and My Three Angels. Within weeks of moving to Hollywood, she landed her first big role in the 1979 television film Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker. She then went on to get supporting roles in various episodes of popular 80s television series, such as Fame, Family, and Heart to Heart. She booked a recurring role in the comedy television drama series Breaking Away and went on to appear in several other television films. Her career was starting to thrive. By 1981, she had quite an extensive acting resume, and this led to her being cast in her first big feature film, the supernatural horror hit Poltergeist, playing Dana Freeling. The film went on to become a sensation and grossed over $70 million at the box office. The role cemented her place in pop culture, and she quickly became a well-known face with a lot of acting work being sent her way. After the success of Poltergeist, she was cast as Robin Maxwell in a pilot episode for the TV miniseries V. She would never complete filming on the highly anticipated show. Dominique's versatility and capabilities as an actress were apparent very early on. Steven Spielberg was the producer of Poltergeist and worked very closely with her. He said of Dominique, "She was a treasure of natural ability." In 1981, Dominique met a sous chef named John Thomas Sweeney at a private party. 7 years her senior, Sweeney was an established chef and worked at Mar Maison. Mar Maison was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Los Angeles, and many a famous face would frequent there. Sweeney's upbringing couldn't have been further from that of Dominique's. His father was an unemployed alcoholic who frequently beat his mother, and his mother worked as a waitress trying to support her family as best she could. When Sweeney was 14, his parents divorced and he set about making plans to move out of Pennsylvania and start a new life. He focused on being a chef and said that this dream was his ticket out of his old life. A matter of weeks after the pair meeting, they moved into a one-bedroom West Hollywood home together. However, the relationship quickly began to deteriorate due to Sweeney's jealous and controlling behavior. He stopped her from seeing friends and frequently tried to get her to quit her flourishing career in a bid to prevent her from meeting new people. The couple rode and fought frequently, and it wasn't long before Sweeney became physically abusive. Dominique appeared in an episode of Hill Street Blues, playing a teenage mother who was the victim of parental abuse. The makeup team applied nothing to her face, as shockingly, all of the cuts and bruises were real and had been caused by Sweeney in the days before the shoot. Her family, although polite and welcoming towards Sweeney, felt uncomfortable in his presence. They all commented on the fact that it was very obvious that Sweeney was far more obsessed with the relationship than Dominique was. Her mother Ellen would later recall the first time she realized her daughter was in grave danger. She said, "She came over here one night and she was weeping. She said, 'Oh, Sweeney has such a terrible temper. He smashes furniture and throws dishes.' And I said, 'Dominique, that is frightening.' I've never forgotten her answer. She said, 'Oh, he'd never hurt me.'" According to a source, in August 1982, Sweeney pulled handfuls of her hair out by the roots. Dominique ran to her mother's house trying to escape, and Ellen found her curled upon the floor in the fetal position, cradling her head. Sweeney followed her to the house and started banging on the doors and windows, demanding they let him in. A few days later, however, Dominique returned to the home she shared with Sweeney, and the pair resumed their relationship. During another fight on September 26, 1982, Sweeney grabbed Dominique by the throat and threw her to the floor. He then proceeded to strangle her. A friend who was staying with the couple heard what he described as loud gagging sounds. He ran into the room where he saw Dominique being attacked. Sweeney denied any wrongdoing and told Dominique to come back to bed, seemingly playing it off as one big misunderstanding. Dominique snuck out of the bedroom window and ran to her car. When Sweeney heard her start the engine, he chased her down and jumped on the car bonnet. She turned the engine off until Sweeney got down from the hood, and as soon as he did this, she sped off into the night. She stayed at the home of a friend for the next few days, and her mother stayed with her too. After this terrifying incident, she phoned Sweeney and ended the relationship. He moved out of the house they shared, and Dominique had the locks changed before she moved back in herself. Tragically, a little over a month later, Dominique Dunne would be dead. On October 30th, 1982, just a few weeks after the pair had ended their relationship, Dominique was rehearsing for her latest project, V, at her West Hollywood home. She was running lines alongside actor David Packer. Dominique took a break to talk with a friend on the phone when she suddenly realized the phone call had been broken into. Sweeney had got the operator to break into the conversation to listen to her. And Dominique said to her friend, "Oh God, it's Sweeney. Let me get him off the phone." At around 9 p.m., Dominique and David heard a loud banging at the front door. Sweeney had been drinking martinis at the Marmaison bar and decided to walk to the house. Sweeney refused to leave unless Dominique came out to talk to him. So she headed out, leaving David Packer inside, and went to speak with Sweeney through the locked door. After a few minutes, she agreed to talk to him on the porch. It wasn't long before an argument between the two began. David Packer recalled hearing smacking sounds followed by 2 screams and then a thudding sound. He phoned the police straight away but was diverted to the wrong police area. He was told that Dominique's house was outside of that particular department's jurisdiction. Packer then phoned a friend and warned him that if he was found dead, John Sweeney would be his killer. Packer left the home through the back door and headed for the driveway, where he saw Sweeney in some bushes kneeling over Dominique's body. Sweeney told David Packer to call the police. Fortunately, this call did connect properly, and when the police arrived, Sweeney put out his hands in the air and said, "I killed my girlfriend, and I tried to kill myself." Dominique was unconscious and transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where she was instantly placed on life support. She remained in a deep coma, and scans showed that she had no brain activity due to oxygen deprivation. When her father Dominic was allowed to see his daughter, he was met with an agonizing sight. Dominique's eyes were wide open, her head had been shaved, and she had a screw in her skull to relieve pressure on her brain. Dominique could see the strangle marks on her neck. Sweeney testified to police that while he remembered arguing with Dominique, he couldn't remember what had happened that led him to attacking her. He said after the verbal argument, all he could recall was being on top of her with his hands around her neck. He said he just exploded and lunged towards her. John Sweeney was immediately arrested and charged with attempted murder. 5 days later, on November 4th, her parents made the unbearably painful decision to consent to her being taken off life support, and Dominique was pronounced dead. It was just weeks before she would turn 23 years old. Her mother Ellen requested that Dominique's kidneys and heart be donated to transplant centers. Her kidneys were donated to 2 people who were at hospital at the same time as her, and her heart was sent to a hospital in San Francisco. The family all agreed that this is what Dominique would have wanted, to help save someone else's life. Dominique's funeral was held 2 days later at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. The funeral was packed. As well as friends and family, celebrities had turned up to pay their respects too. She was laid to rest near her Poltergeist co-star, Heather O'Rourke, who had lost her life aged just 12 years old, and actress Natalie Wood, who was a good friend of Ellen and one of Dominique's heroes. After Dominique died, Sweeney was charged with first-degree murder, which he pled not guilty to. He was also charged with assault with intent to do great bodily harm, and was held on a $150,000 bail. Dominique's appearance in the episode of Hill Street Blues aired on November 18, 1982, just 2 weeks after her death. The episode was dedicated to her in the opening credits. Sweeney's trial began in August of 1983 and was presided over by Judge Burton S. Katz. Little did anyone know this would go down in history as one of the most controversial trials. Sweeney took the stand in his own defense. Patrick Kyriel, the owner of Marmaison, described Sweeney as a very dependable young man and said he would personally obtain the best legal representation he could for him. However, Sweeney was given a court-appointed attorney named Michael Adelson, a criminal defense attorney who was notoriously tough. During the trial, Sweeney said that when he had turned up at Dominique's home that day, they had worked things out and were going to start afresh. He claimed that they were planning on moving back in together, and there were even talks of marriage and children. He claimed that on the night of October 30th, Dominique Dunne had abruptly changed her mind about resuming their relationship, and that she had been lying to him and leading him on. At that point, Sweeney said he exploded and lunged at her. He still maintained that he had no recollection of attacking her, but stopped when he realized that she was no longer breathing. Sweeney said he had attempted to revive her by making her walk around the driveway, but she soon fell onto the floor. He then claimed he had tried to give her CPR, which caused her to vomit. Sweeney said that he too had vomited and ran inside the house and consumed 2 whole bottles of pills in an attempt to take his own life. The police disputed this and said there was no evidence to suggest this had actually happened. Sweeney said he then went back out to the driveway where Dominique was lying and lay down beside her. He said he had tried to help by pulling her tongue out of her throat, something he said he used to do for his epileptic father. Michael Adelson said that Sweeney's actions were not premeditated and that he had acted out of a crime of passion, which was provoked by Dominique's alleged lies about a reconciliation. Dominique's family strenuously denied these claims and said that she was well and truly done with their relationship. A letter written by Dominique addressed to Sweeney was read out. It said, "The whole thing has made me realize how scared I am of you, and I don't just mean physically. I'm afraid of the next time you are going to have another mood swing." Deputy Frank D'Amelio was the first officer to arrive on scene, and he testified that Sweeney said to him, "Man, I blew it. Killed her. I didn't think I'd choked her that hard. But I don't know. I just kept on choking her. I just lost my temper and blew it again." The medical examiner determined that she had been strangled for at least 3 minutes. Police and prosecutors quickly dismissed their heat of passion defense, as they believed that given the fact she was choked for at least 3 minutes, this left a lot of time for Sweeney to regain control of himself and stop what he was doing, but instead, he continued to carry out the vicious and prolonged attack. The prosecution called one of Sweeney's ex-girlfriends, Lillian Pierce, to the stand. At the request of Sweeney's legal team, Lillian did not testify in the jury's presence. Michael Adelson requested that Judge Katz rule her testimony inadmissible, as it was, in his words, prejudicial. Judge Katz granted this request, and the jury would never learn of Lillian's statements. Lillian said that she and Sweeney had dated on and off for around 3 years, and that he had assaulted her on 10 occasions. She said she had been hospitalized twice for her severe injuries. During one of these attacks, Lillian sustained a perforated eardrum, a collapsed lung, and a broken nose. During her testimony, Sweeney became so angry, he jumped up from his seat and ran towards the door leading into the judge's chambers. He had to be subdued by 2 court bailiffs and 4 armed guards. After this outburst, they were forced to handcuff him to his chair. Through tears, he apologized, and Judge Katz accepted his words and said, and moved on with the trial. Although Sweeney frequently cried, resulting in the trial being postponed until he was calm again, the Dunn family were told to show no emotion. At the behest of Adelson, Judge Katz stated, "If any member of the Dunn family cries out, rolls his eyes, exclaims in any way, he will be asked to leave the courtroom." As well as Lillian's testimony, Judge Katz refused to allow testimonies from both Dominique's friends and her mother Ellen. He ruled their statements about Sweeney's abuse as nothing more than hearsay. It was one devastating blow after another for Dominique's friends and family. Michael Adelson requested that Judge Katz rule that the evidence presented was insufficient to prove first-degree murder, as there was no proof of predetermination. Judge Katz granted this request and instructed jurors they were only allowed to consider charges of either manslaughter or second-degree murder. Dominique's family were devastated. On September 21, 1983, after an arduous 8 days of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. Sweeney was sat with his hands clasped around a Bible and nodded towards the jury as the verdict was read out. When Judge Katz told the jury they could leave as justice had been served, Dominique's father shouted, "Not for our family." Dominique accused Judge Katz of purposely withholding Lillian's testimony from the jury, which could have helped establish Sweeney's incredibly violent history with women. Media outlets quickly picked up on the outcome, and Judge Katz received immense criticism for his handling of the trial. People felt that his rulings always clearly favored the defense, and a victims' rights group founded by actress Teresa Saldana, called Victims for Victims, marched outside the courtroom in protest. A local Los Angeles TV station did a poll, which saw Judge Katz voted 4th worst judge in Los Angeles County. In November, Sweeney was sentenced. He received 6 years in prison, which was the maximum penalty possible for the charge, and he would only serve 3.5 of those years. Dominic spoke at length about the trial and his feelings towards Judge Katz. He said, "Our family has never favored with Judge Katz's charms, not even to the point of simple courtesies. For 7 weeks, he mispronounced Dominique's name, insistently calling her by my name, Dominic. People wandered in and out of the courtroom. Lawyers for other cases chatted with the clerk or used the bailiff's telephone. At the sentencing, in a shock twist, Judge Katz actually criticized the jury's ruling of manslaughter, claiming he didn't agree with it. Katz stated he felt Dominique's death was a case pure and simple of murder with malice. He went on to say, the jury's foreman, Paul Spiegel, told the media that he and other jurors were shocked by the criticism from Katz and referred to his comments as a cheap shot. Spiegel felt that the criticism did not stem from the verdict itself, but came off the back of the criticism that Katz himself had received from the media and the public. Spiegel also went on to say that had the jury heard all the evidence and been presented with everything, they would have convicted John Sweeney of the murder of Dominique Dunn. A year after Dominique's murder, her mother Ellen founded Justice for Homicide Victims, a victims' rights organization. Her work with this would see her recognized by President George H.W. Bush. Dominique's father also threw himself into work and activism. He started keeping a journal during the trial, and those writings were published in a March 1984 issue of Vanity Fair. It was titled Justice, a father's account at the trial of his daughter's killer. After this, Dominic began covering and reporting on many high-profile cases, such as the Menendez brothers and O.J. Simpson. Dominic said of Sweeney that, "Maybe the law will let him go. I'm not going to let him go." And Dominic stayed true to his word. After his release from prison in 1987, Sweeney went straight back into working as a chef and was hired by the Chronicle, an upscale restaurant in Santa Monica. This job would not last long, however. Dominique's family started handing out flyers that said, "The food you ate tonight was cooked by the hands that killed Dominique Dunn." As the protest showed no sign of stopping, Sweeney left the Chronicle and fled the Los Angeles area. It wasn't until the mid-90s that the Dunn family would hear Sweeney's name again. Dominique was contacted by a doctor in Florida who had read his article in Vanity Fair. The doctor said that his daughter had gotten engaged to a chef named John Sweeney and wanted to know if it was the same man. Dominique's brother Griffin contacted the woman in an attempt to get her to break off the engagement. After this, Sweeney moved away from the area again, claiming he was being harassed. He changed his name to John Moorer. Dominique Dunn admitted to having Sweeney followed and tracked and talked of this freely on an episode of CNN's Larry King Live. He said that the utter injustice of Sweeney's sentence drove him almost crazy. He spoke about a woman who was now in her 80s and who had been a member of the jury during Sweeney's trial. She had written to him expressing how sorry she was and that the verdict was bothering her and she needed to clear it up before she died. Dominic was incredibly touched by her words. After many years, her father said he didn't want to waste his life filled with anger and that he no longer wanted to spend every waking moment keeping tabs on Sweeney. The last that appears to be publicly known about John Moorer is that he was residing in San Rafael, California, working as the director of food services for Smith Ranch Homes, a retirement community. Dominique's family worked tirelessly to keep her name and memory alive and to draw as much attention to their daughter's case as possible. Her brother Griffin still works with the Justice for Homicide Victims group. Her family's activism and constant fight for justice will never be forgotten. Dominique Dunn was a bright, gifted, and warm-hearted 22-year-old. She was at the beginning of her life and undoubtedly had so much more to give and achieve. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On February 3, 2003, a hysterical 911 call was made from the mansion of famous record producer Phil Spector. Spector's personal chauffeur made that very call, and he would become a star witness in a case and trial that captivated people all over the world. Born in 1939 in New York, Harvey Philip Spector showed creative talent and a passion for music from a very young age. He quickly began forming bands and learning instruments. While he achieved success with his band, the Teddy Bears, his look drastically changed when he decided to move into producing records. He became a millionaire before the age of 21, and by the 1960s he had 23 records in the top 50. It was also in the 1960s that he signed the band The Ronettes to his record label. 1/3 of the talented trio, Ronnie, fell in love with Spector and they later married. However, the honeymoon phase soon faded. Spector quickly became controlling and abusive towards her. Metal bars were placed over the windows, barbed wire put around the mansion, and he would take her shoes in a bid to prevent her from running away. Ronnie claimed he frequently threatened her life and often pulled guns on her. In her 1990 memoir, she spoke about the years of torment which culminated in her escaping from the house, barefoot, with the help of her mother. She said, multiple witnesses would say although he was a musical genius, he could also become erratic and volatile and frequently drank heavily during recording sessions. The more he drank, the darker things became, and he would often pull guns out and fire them at walls and ceilings. Despite the personal turmoil, professionally, Spector's career was still on the up. He was collaborating and working with the likes of the Beatles, the Ramones, the Supremes, and the Rolling Stones. He contributed to and produced a vast amount of hit songs, including Rock and Roll High School, Imagine and You've Lost That Loving Feeling. He also created and coined a new music production technique that people would use for years to come known as the Wall of Sound. He had well and truly reached the top of his profession and was highly sought after by various A-list artists. However, during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, Spector took more of a back seat, remaining virtually inactive. Rumors about his wild, bizarre, and troubling personal life began hitting the headlines once more. He was, however, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame during these decades. February 3, 2003. Phil Spector had been driving around LA going on several dates with different women visiting his favorite spots. Over several hours he spent time at the Grill, Trader Vic's, and Dan Tana's. He had already taken a concoction of pills with a mixture of alcohol including liquor that was 75% proof. But Spector's night wasn't over. And sometime after midnight he and one of his dates entered the VIP area of the famous House of Blues on Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles. Lana Clarkson was an American actress and model. Born in California in 1962, she quickly showed a spark for the entertainment industry. She was talented, beautiful, and had a lot of passion for performing. People that knew her said she also had great comedic timing, regularly working on her own sketches and stand-up ideas. Lana hoped to be cast in different roles that showed her many talents and versatility as an actress. By the 80s, she was achieving success within the industry. These parts were in big movies and TV shows, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Scarface, Three's Company, and The Jeffersons, to name a few. She was also passionate when it came to helping others. She did a lot of charity work and volunteered weekly for Project Angel Food, which delivered food for those in Los Angeles affected by HIV or AIDS. As she approached her 30s, however, her career started to slow down and she wasn't acting as frequently. She decided to start a website as a way of interacting with her fans. On this site, she sold signed copies of her films as a way of making some extra money and giving her fans something more personal. In 2001, she had a serious accident, breaking both her wrists in 26 places, requiring multiple surgeries. This left her physically unable to carry on any film or commercial work for a long time. After this long break, she struggled even more to get the roles she used to, and she began taking part-time jobs to support herself. In early 2003, she took on a new job as a hostess at the House of Blues in West Hollywood, Los Angeles. Many that knew her said this was a clever and strategic decision, as the House of Blues was a popular celebrity hangout. Anybody who was anybody would spend time there, and being a hostess, Lana would regularly be making connections with all manner of powerful people within the industry. On February 3rd, while working in the VIP area, she walked right into one of those powerful people, Phil Spector. Witnesses said that Spector was wearing one of his notorious wigs, and Lana momentarily thought that he was an unknown female trying to get into the exclusive area. At first, she refused to entry, but upon being told he was a famous record producer, she immediately apologized and began showering him with attention and drinks. When Spector's date no longer wanted to participate in the drinking, Spector sent her home. His attention was now firmly on Lana Clarkson. It was very clear to onlookers that Spector was heavily intoxicated by this point, and was continuing to drink heavily and spiral further out of control. A few hours later, at around 2:30 a.m., Lana finished her shift and went to go and find her car. She clearly made a good impression on Spector, as after he spotted her in the street, he begged her to come back to his mansion for a drink. The CCTV footage from outside the venue shows Lana getting into Spector's car. Sometime after 3 a.m., Spector's personal driver dropped both Phil and Lana at the back door of the producer's mansion in Alhambra. It was about 40 miles away from the House of Blues. Known as the Castle, this secluded 3-acre house boasted 33 rooms and was Spector's pride and joy. The details surrounding how the next series of events came to be will never be fully known. Just before 5 a.m., Spector's driver Adriano D'Souza heard a loud popping sound. He got out of the car to check it was nothing to do with the vehicle and was getting back into it when he saw the back door slowly open. Phil Spector emerged holding a gun and said, "I think I've killed someone." Upon looking past Spector into the foyer, Adriano saw the legs of Lana Clarkson, and she was slumped in a chair with blood coming from her mouth. Adriano ran down the driveway. He was fearing for his life and knew he needed to call the police. Before he made the call to 911, he left a voicemail on Michelle Blaine's answer phone. Michelle was Spector's longtime personal assistant. Adriano briefly told her what had happened, and he would later say that he didn't know the exact address, and he initially phoned her to ask for it. After backing out onto the street and confirming the road name, he phoned 911. At around 5:10, police descended on Spector's sprawling property. When the police spotted him, Spector began to retreat and seemingly started to reach for something in his shirt. Worried he might be attempting to arm himself, they tried to use a taser on Spector, but it got tangled in his clothing and didn't work. They then rushed him with a ballistic shield and knocked him to the floor. Other officers ran past to find Lana. It was evident that nothing could be done to save her, and she was already deceased. Near Lana's body was an open drawer containing an empty gun holster. The holster seemed to match the gun lying next to Lana's legs. Although no fingerprints were found on the gun when it was examined, Lana's blood was discovered around various parts of the mansion. In one of the bathrooms, police found a cloth covered in blood, as well as blood on one of Spector's jackets hanging in a closet, and more blood was on the stairs. In the main living room, police found an empty bottle of tequila and a cocktail glass with some lit candles. Just after 6 a.m., Spector was brought in for questioning on suspicion of murder, and the arresting officers noted that he reeked of alcohol and was clearly inebriated. Shouting and slurring at the officers, he denied any wrongdoing and claimed that Lana had taken her own life. He said she even kissed the gun before she pulled the trigger. While in jail, he made a phone call to Robert Shapiro, a defense attorney to the stars. Most notably, Robert Shapiro had been part of O.J. Simpson's defense team in the high-profile 1995 trial. Thanks to Shapiro, Spector's bail was set at $1 million, which he quickly made and swiftly headed back to his multi-million-dollar mansion. Following a similar approach he had taken in the Simpson trial, Shapiro began regularly conversing with the media in a bid to control the situation and present Spector's narrative. In the following months, Spector's PR team also appeared to go into overdrive, and multiple unfavorable stories were coming out about Lana Clarkson. It was alleged that she was depressed at her fledgling career and had just wanted to end it all. A portrait was painted of her as a washed-up B-list movie actress who was struggling to make ends meet. And shockingly, despite no confirmation of this, it was reported by the Los Angeles radio station that Lana had accidentally shot herself. During these months, Spector also made many various bizarre televised interviews, telling anyone that would listen that Lana had taken her own life on that fateful night. The autopsy results finally came back. They determined that Lana had died when a single bullet severed her spine. On the 22nd of September 2003, despite Spector's claims of suicide, Lana's death was officially ruled as a homicide, and just a few months later Phil Spector was formally charged with the death of Lana Clarkson. He pled not guilty and maintained that she had taken her own life. It would be 5 years before the case would enter a courtroom. In March 2007, Spector went on trial for the murder of Lana Clarkson. He was charged with second-degree murder, and it was a media frenzy. Judge Larry Paul Fidler was presiding and allowed the proceedings to be televised. Robert Shapiro was no longer working with Spector, and Leslie Abramson was now in charge. At this point, she was most famous for representing Eric Menendez in the infamous Menendez brothers trial. Leslie and Phil clashed and they parted ways. While looking for another lawyer, Spector decided to take matters into his own hands and created a website with the intent of putting his version of events to the public. His personal assistant Michelle helped him film these strange and erratic videos. She recalled feeling at the time that something was deeply disturbed about the way he was approaching the situation. After a while of searching for a new attorney, Bruce Cutler took over. However, he too withdrew due to differences of opinions with Spector. This was just days before the closing arguments. Linda Kenny Baden then stepped in and took over for the final part of the trial. This constant hiring and firing of his legal teams also kept setting the trial back a huge amount. During the trial, Spector's love of guns and his history of abusive and manipulative relationships with people fueled the prosecution's case significantly. By this time, multiple women had spoken out against Spector, and many artists and assistants could attest to his erratic and volatile behavior. One of Spector's sons, Gary, said that at no point did he disbelieve anyone's account of how Spector had behaved in the past. He said it even gave him flashbacks as to what it was like to live with him. The star witness in the trial, Adriano de Souza, testified on the stand and had a lot more to say about the limo ride over to the castle. He claimed that Lana was less keen on going back to Spector's mansion and that Spector kept putting pressure on her to get into the limo. She eventually said she would go back for one drink and then she wanted to leave. This reluctance to go with him in the first place did little to help the defense's case. Spector's defense team painted Lana in a very unflattering light. She was spoken of as someone who seemed desperate to revive an already unsuccessful career, and in failing to do so had slumped into depression, culminating in her taking her own life in Spector's home. On September 10, 2007, the jury began their deliberations. After a week, they came back in a deadlock 7-5. They deliberated further, trying to come to a unanimous decision. But on the 26th of September, the judge declared a mistrial as the jurors were still in the deadlock. This time of 10-2. This was, however, in favor of the prosecution. This ultimately meant that, as they hadn't reached a majority, the whole process would have to start all over again with a new trial. It was a devastating blow for Lana's loved ones and the prosecution. Prosecutor Alan Jackson said he wanted a retrial as quickly as possible. He said he owed it to Lana and her family to see that justice was done. After the trial was over, in a shocking twist, Spector asked his assistant Michelle if she would marry him. He worried that she knew too much and said he would feel safer if they were married, as spouses don't have to testify against each other in court. Michelle refused. 13 months later, on October 29, 2008, the retrial began. Judge Larry Fiedler was presiding again. However, this time the trial was not televised. Doran Weinberg was now Spector's attorney, and going up against Weinberg for the prosecution was still Alan Jackson. Weinberg argued that the only witness who had been in the vicinity at the time, Adriano de Souza, was continuously giving slightly different versions of the event and how it had played out. Weinberg said that this alone should be enough to acquit Spector. Prosecutor Alan Jackson fired back, arguing that Lana had shown absolutely no signs of suicidal behavior, and it just didn't add up, no matter which way one looked at it. The judge, again, allowed Spector's past history of guns and relationships to be used as evidence during the trial, and witness after witness came forward to attest to these harrowing accounts. The prosecution focused and honed in more on the analysis of the blood, and it was clear that the forensic evidence was overwhelming. The blood splatter analysis shows that there was blood on the back of Lana's hands and wrists. An expert testified that as she was holding the gun herself, this particular position of the blood didn't add up. They said that this indicated that her hands would have been up and near her mouth, with her palms facing outwards, not inwards, as if she was holding a gun. They argued that the placement of her hands appeared to be in a more defensive position. Put simply, the blood was on the wrong side of her hands and wrists. The prosecution also said that the blood on Spector's jacket definitively put him within arm's reach of Lana, with his arms pointed at her face. Alan Jackson reminded the courtroom of Lana's terrible accident in which she broke both her wrists. Following the path that the bullet entered her mouth, they knew that the gun would have to have been held in a very specific way. Because of the spiral fracture she had from her accident, she couldn't have physically held the gun in the position it would have had to have been in. They also said that in a 10,000 square foot house, the chances of Lana, who had never been there before, finding a gun from within a drawer, seemed totally far-fetched and ridiculous. This same gun, allegedly used to shoot herself, had no fingerprints on it at all. If Lana had been holding it, her should have been there. The prosecution speculated that the way in which Lana's body was found indicated something very significant. Her jacket and shoes were on and her handbag was across her shoulder. It appeared that she was attempting to leave the property. It was in that moment that Spector felt like he was losing control, and just the same as the other ex-partners described, he reached for the gun in a bid to control the situation. This, along with all of the witness testimonies and the other evidence collected from the scene, showed that the prosecution appeared to have a firmly watertight case. On April 13, 2009, the jury found Phil Spector guilty of second-degree murder. And on May 29, 2009, he was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. In January 2021, Phil Spector died in a prison hospital from complications relating to COVID-19. He was 81 years old and would have been eligible for parole in 2024. Lana Clarkson's passionate, warm, and loving personality lives on through her friends and family. She was a funny and talented woman who had so much more to give and achieve. Her life was cut tragically short, but the memories people have of her continue to keep her vibrant spirit alive. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Amarjit Satta, the world's youngest serial killer. No matter how many different types of serial killers there are, it is unbelievable that an 8-year-old child would get addicted to murder and pleasure. Psychologists and sociologists continue to be amazed by this little boy from Bihar. He murdered 3 children one by one without guilt at such a young age. But on the contrary, he threw an innocent smile. The cops asked him about the murder. Here is the story of the world's youngest serial killer. What precisely did that Bihari kid do? Unfortunately, we'll have to travel back to over a decade to find out. Amarjit, born in 1996, had already committed 3 murders at the age of 8. Born in the village of Mushahar, Bihar, the kid experienced a childhood, however. None of the people around him knew that he would commit such heinous crimes. Some people speculate that as his father was a laborer, he forced Amarjit to work from a very early age. Considering that the family was poor, abuse must have taken place that led to the nurturing of Amarjit's psychopathic and sadistic tendencies. Amarjit seemed to find joy in picking out victims he had easy access to and would strangle them to death. What is more horrific is that the families and the villagers knew about the murders that Amarjit had been committing, but chose to remain silent, deeming them as internal familial issues. As a result, they didn't realize that Amarjit's killing spree would soon show its marks outside of his family, and his cousin, Kuzbu, was among one of his victims. Amarjit's distant aunt, Chun Shin Devi, said she had left her daughter Kuchbu to sleep at her village primary school while attending household chores and returned to find that she had disappeared. After the news spread, people started to fear the worst, and knowing about Amarjit's past and his easy access to Kuchbu, they confronted him. When villagers confronted Amarjit, he alleged to have confessed to the murder, leading them to where he had attempted to conceal the body in a shallow grave. After his arrest, police said the boy had then confessed to the murder of his 8-month-old sister 3 months ago and his 6-month-old cousin, the daughter of a maternal uncle, almost a year ago. As he was being questioned, Amarjit showed no guilt and cheerfully told the villagers about how he strangled the child to death and led them to the shallow grave where she was buried. Excitedly, he told them, "I killed her by beating her using a brick." He told them that he quickly covered her remains in the grass around the area and left for his house after she was dead. After confessing, Amarjit was arrested for the murder of Kushbu Devi. Unfortunately, because his first 2 victims' murders were covered up by his family, he was never proven guilty. Despite this, he was interrogated and asked questions about how and why he assaulted his victims. His response would send shivers down anyone. Yet Amarjit Satta merely smiled at the officers and asked for more biscuits when confronted about the deaths. He showed no guilt, and if he was pointed in the direction of his horrible actions, he would stop talking and grin. As it became evident that this was a clear example of child psychopathy, the Superintendent Amir Lodha ordered that Amarjit's case should be investigated from a psychiatric standpoint. Soon after, Shamshad Hussain, Patna-based psychotherapist, investigated Amarjit's case, concluding that this was a case of a youngster who lacked apparent guilt and had a great passion for inflicting pain on others. And he also said that it was a concrete example of psychopathy. Amarjit appeared to have a brain abnormality that caused a chemical imbalance, leading to enhanced enjoyment from inflicting harm on others. In addition, he was diagnosed with a hereditary behavior disorder, and caused him to commit acts of violence since he had no sense of right or wrong. Finally, Amarjit was prosecuted as a juvenile, and it is believed that under Indian law, he was sentenced to only 3 years in juvenile jail, as no kid may be condemned to more than that. He was sent to a mental health care center after serving his sentence because of his mental state and the grave threat that he posed to society. The whereabouts of Amarjit Sada remain unknown. However, in 2015, he contacted the Post-Mortem Post and claimed to be at a children's facility in India where he was meant to reside until he became 18 years old. Amarjit Sada is about 26 years old now. He is expected to be living a new life under a new identity. No one knows where he is or what he does. Can hope that he has received the treatment he needs and can live life like an average person by staying at the Raman home. While it's unclear whether he'll commit more crimes or if his child psychopathy was treated at the time of his conviction, it is safe to assume that Amarjit Sada's case is unique and that it involved not only premeditated infant murders, but also elaborate plans to hide their bodies so that he wouldn't be caught. It's terrifying to think that an 8-year-old child did this. Some argued that Amarjit was not the original perpetrator and was framed for the murders, since the magnitude of the crime and the complex nature of the body hideouts could not have been committed by an 8-year-old child. Now this argument has some credibility since no examples of psychotic youngsters, who not only killed their victims but also went to tremendous measures to conceal the corpse and evidence, have been documented. Despite this plausible conspiracy theory, the fact that he was very excited to show the bodies and knew precisely where they were, as well as his smile when asked about the murders, seems to point us in the direction of Amarjit Sada being India's and the world's youngest and most infamous serial killer. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue.